Good morning. Good morning again. Good afternoon again. And now would you please welcome Ambassador Mark Green, CEO of the Wilson Center.
Thank you, Mark, and thanks to our panel members for a great discussion. As I introduce the next panel discussion, one that's brought so many of you here, I wanted to take a moment for a point of personal privilege, a little bit of advertising. So the Wilson Center is a unique institution in foreign policy. We are congressionally chartered, we're scholarship-driven, and we're fiercely nonpartisan and independent. And I think that special status creates special obligations for us as well. We try not to duplicate what others are doing, but instead prioritize the most important issues and opportunities. And we try to do so in a way that our scholarship-driven approach can truly add value. That's why this is a perfect place for today's event. It's also the reason that we launched our Wahba Institute for Strategic Competition, to help shape conversations and to offer up meaningful policy reforms that will help strengthen American leadership in the era of great power competition. Today's event focuses on the promise and opportunities for the new Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. IPEF, as it's called, harnesses the strength of long-term allies like Australia, Japan, and South Korea. It reinvigorates those relationships by bringing in increasingly important economic powers from the region, powers like the nations of Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia alone is now home to some 650 million people, and taken collectively, it is the world's fifth largest economy. It's no secret how America engages with this part of the world's most dynamic economic region, will shape so much of our future. And I think we all realize there's an awful lot at stake. Every day we see new threats to the rules-based economic order, an economic order that has lifted lives and built communities and advanced and improved the human condition. Our challenge is to find innovative ways to turn back those threats and to create new momentum for commerce, trade, and entrepreneurship. IPEF offers up a new rules-based roadmap that can help. It aims to provide a foundation for renewed economic vitality that helps member countries individually and collectively. All of this, of course, is music to the ears of WISC. And again, staying true to our mission, we want to make sure that we lift it up and prioritize it in today's foreign policy discussions. We are honored to be hosting the Secretary of Commerce, Gina Raimondo, who of course led the successful conclusion of IPEF's supply chain pillar. She's also leading the fair economy and clean economy pillars of IPEF negotiations that we all hope can be completed by the APEC summit in November. At a time when the U.S. Commerce Department is taking on massive new responsibilities in American economic leadership, including the effort to revitalize the U.S. semiconductor industry while also protecting our national security, we are all fortunate to have an exceptional leader at the department's helm. A good part of the criticism in this town is that we have too many public officials who don't understand the private sector and private sector leaders who don't understand the public sector and how government works. She combines the entrepreneurial spirit of a venture capitalist with her executive experience as Rhode Island's governor, and she applies them to the task of revitalizing America's economy and economic relationships. Joining Secretary Raimondo on stage is our own Dr. Sadek Wahba. Not only is Sadek the chair of WISC and the chairman and managing partner of I2 Capital, he is also a member of President Biden's National Infrastructure Advisory Council. He earned his doctorate degree in economics from Harvard University, and he began his career as an economist for the World Bank. I am grateful that he is here to help lead this conversation, and with that, I'll turn things over to you, Sadek, and again, Secretary, it's great to have you. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Green, for your kind remarks. I'd like to also add my personal thanks to Secretary Raimondo for taking the time to be with us today at WISC at the Wilson Center. It really has been an extraordinary Department of Commerce, full of dynamism, and so thank you for your leadership.
Thank you.
So when you look over the last 10 years, trade as a percentage of global economic growth. It was around 60% just before the financial crisis, and is now down to somewhere around 55%, which is, from a relative perspective, it's a meaningful change. Free trade agreements are not in favor these days. We've seen an increase in trade barriers and tariffs, not just between us and China, but between us and allies, and within EU, also an increase in trade barriers, UK, Europe, EU, and other countries. So we tried to have the TPP, and the Trump administration withdrew from that. And interestingly, immediately after, China started its own version of the TPP. But then in 2022, President Biden launched IPEF. And obviously, IPEF is not a trade agreement, but it looks as if it achieves much more. It really looks to the long-term economic prosperity of the peoples involved in IPEF. So what would you say are the long-term objectives of IPEF?
Yeah, a lot in that question. First of all, thank you for having me. It's fantastic to be here. And as I was listening to the ambassador's introduction of business people who don't know how to interface with government and vice versa, I would say that you, Sadek, stand out in that respect. We have had an outstanding partnership since I've been secretary, and I just want to thank you publicly for your engagement with me at the Commerce Department, but also with the president and everything we're doing in infrastructure. The public-private partnerships are more important than ever. In fact, this whole Center for Strategic Competition doesn't happen if it's just the government. So I want to thank you for recognizing that and working so closely with us. You know, you're right. Free trade agreements aren't in favor at the moment. Some people think that's a bad thing. Some people think that's a good thing. It is what it is. But yet, we must be present in the Indo-Pacific. As you said, 40% of the world's economy, most dynamic economies, fast-growing economies, chock full of innovation. We have to be present. And so for the 5 years before President Biden took office, the United States was not present economically in these regions. We didn't even, have a framework for engagement, I would say. Pull out of...
We need clean air, not another bill.
So you talk about supply chain, which is one of the key pillars. I think that you've reached preliminary agreement with all of the countries on the supply chain. You mentioned earlier that the IPEF framework in general has that flexibility for countries to select one or the other. Obviously, supply chain is one where I believe everyone wants to participate in.
Yes.
We had a panel earlier that talked about the key components of that supply chain. What can you tell us a little bit more about what it is that you're looking to achieve, and particularly maybe two areas? One is data sharing, which is an important element that people have talked about, and then the other one is more enforceability. So there is a clear benefit for all to participate in the supply chain structure, but do you think that the enforceability element is an important part of what an agreement should include?
Yeah. Okay, so a couple things. Yes, you're right. I was very pleased. I was in Detroit over the Memorial Day weekend. We had a ministerial. We had all of the countries were there, which is excellent. 13 countries came. And we agreed in principle, all 14 countries, to the text of the supply chain pillar. I just want to say, as evidence of the demand, the economic demand signal coming from this region, President Biden announced IPEF in May in Tokyo. 4 months later, in September, every country signed on to negotiate. And then a few months after that, in May, we had complete agreement on the supply chain pillar. That's, things don't happen that fast.
No, that's probably unique.
It is. The momentum, the speed, the pace, the urgency with which we're working this is incredible. I have people on my team who worked on TPP. Nothing happened in TPP in a matter of months. So what's my point? My point is, one, they have a demand. Two, there's something to the fact that this is not a trade agreement. It's more flexible. It's responsive to a few specific needs: supply chain, decarbonization, infrastructure, digital. And so it allows us to move fast. Is it enforceable? I would say yes and no. It's not a traditional trade agreement. You know, it's not enforceable insofar as the tariffs don't come back up if there's noncompliance. But it is enforceable because countries that don't follow the rules or live up to their commitments don't receive the benefits, right? So if there's a country who is not following as according to the agreement, then they won't receive the benefits. That we have, for example, we've set up an IPEF supply chain council. Every country has an appointed person to that council. That's a way to facilitate commerce, a way to deal with issues, a way to share data, a way to predict supply chain problems before they happen, all incredibly valuable to all of our economies. You want to be part of that club. So this is more of an incentive. We want to provide incentive to participate, and in that respect, it's enforceable, because if you don't participate, you don't get the benefit. But it is true, there's no, legal enforceability per se.
So we talked about the supply chain pillar. There are, of course, two pillars where you're leading also, which is the clean economy and the fair economy pillars. The clean economy also includes a component which relates to global infrastructure, which plays a strategic element in the context of the U.S. overall policy of strategic competition. So what can you tell us about those two pillars, which really are going to complement the supply chain as well as the fair economy one?
So you know this as a businessman better than I, but every American company I talk to says we would do more business in, fill in the blank, India, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, if there were less corruption, a fair court system, tax structure which is fair and transparent and consistent. So that's what Pillar 4 is all about, which is to say, if you want the benefit of, more supply chains in the region, more capital for infrastructure in the region, investors need to have some confidence and trust. So in the fourth pillar, which is anti-corruption, good governance, we're asking the countries to sign up to certain standards around transparency, predictability, anti-tax and anti-corruption. And if they don't, then they'll be kicked out of the club. They won't have the benefits. And we are also, the United States, I should say this, although the Commerce Department is taking the lead on this negotiation, this is obviously an all-of-government priority. So State Department, Treasury, USAID will be providing technical assistance to these countries as they improve their tax code, improve their anti-corruption, et cetera. With the third pillar, infrastructure and decarbonization, I have been to these countries. I have spoken to the leaders in all of these countries. They need better infrastructure. They want better infrastructure. They want to race towards a carbon-free world, and that requires capital, and that requires know-how. And so in this respect, what we are saying to the countries is, let us work with you and help you. Once again, State Department will be bringing money to the table to do like a deal accelerator, to get deals ready on the ground. Just as you know yourself, you can't invest in something if it's not investable, if it's not ready to be invested in. So the State Department, USTDA, USAID, gonna come to the table to get these deals ready. And then U.S. private sector and Japan and Australia and New Zealand excited to make these investments. I should say, I Squared Capital, in this respect, Sadek is really a leader in this effort. He announced a $1 billion plus fund to invest in IPEF countries in sustainable infrastructure. And the DFC, U.S. Development Finance Corporation, put $300 million in that as kind of concessionary capital, if you will. What's the point? That's exactly the model. You asked, what does success look like? 50 more of those in the next 10 years. The DFC or the World Bank or Multilateral Development Bank or some kind of capital combined with pure private capital invested in the region to decarbonize, make our supply chains more resilient.
So you bring a very important element when it comes to fair economy, where you mention capacity building. Because one of the issues that you see in some, not just IPEF countries, but other countries, which is the willingness to improve rule of law, improve the systems they have, but it's a question of training, it's a question of capacity, it's a question of bringing in latest technologies, improving the education system. So one of the components of IPEF, which I think is, again, unique in its respect, is that you're integrating that capacity building effort directly into the different pillars. So you're looking to create that know-how, but with a direct impact associated with the fair economy pillar. So you're not basically telling countries, you need to do 1, 2, 3, but you're basically suggesting, we will try and help you in doing that. So could you give us a little bit of more information on how that capacity building will be integrated within the IPEF framework?
Yes, I mean, really it's exactly as you say. A number of these countries certainly have the desire and the will to take these steps. They understand that in order to attract outside capital, they will need to invest in, their systems. But so many of them say, like, how do we do it? It's very interesting. So that's when we can say, we'll send technical experts from the U.S. And by the way, it's not just the U.S. Japan is leaning in on this. South Korea is leaning in on this. Australia, New Zealand, they want to send technical experts as well to some of these other countries. And at the end of the day, what do we have? Like, if we're successful, we have a rules-based order with rules of the road, less corruption in this part of the world. So I think that it's not, the approach, as you're saying, it's not heavy-handed. It's not let us tell you how to do things. It's let us work together, offering technical assistance, capital, connections, connectivity, data, the end result of which is a more resilient supply chain for all of us and a real U.S. economic presence in the region.
So we have a summit in November in San Francisco. What would you like to achieve between now and November?
I'm smiling because I do have a lot to do between now and then. So there's the APEC leaders meeting in San Francisco at the end of November, and I am determined to finalize agreements with all of these countries on all 3 pillars that I'm managing. So the supply chain pillar, we signed up over Memorial Day. By November, I'd like to deliver the tax and anti-corruption and the infrastructure and decarbonization. And I also would like to be able to have a couple of more announcements, similar to the I-squared announcement, of real, concrete deliverables. That's what the region wants to see. Concrete deliverables. And quite frankly, it's what we in America need.
That's right. So as part of WISC and the Institute for Strategic Competition, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you a question about China.
Yeah.
So the president met President Xi Jinping in Bali. There was an agreement to improve relations. Since then, we've had the Secretary of State visit. We've had the Secretary of Treasury. You met your counterpart in Washington, D.C., and the honorary chairman of the Kissinger Institute on China, which is here at the Wilson Center, at the young age of 100, went to China and visited President Xi Jinping, which is amazing. The Department of Commerce is at the intersection of all of the different components related to the relationship with China. What is it that the Department of Commerce and you are looking to do with regards to our relationship with China?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And I do plan to travel later this summer. We're still finalizing a date and plans. At a high level, we need to do business with China wherever we can. We need to promote wherever we can, but we need to protect where we must. And I have a role to play in both of those. So for example, trading wherever we can. There are many industries, food, entertainment. I was recently with Bob Iger of Disney. Their Shanghai park is growing gangbusters. You know, Starbucks is opening a store a day in China. I at the Commerce Department recently started an initiative around export promotion of small U.S. companies in the health and beauty product space. Like, there is no national security risk to the United States selling coffee and health and beauty aids to China. It creates jobs in America. There's a lot of benefit to doing business where we can. Having said that, we have to protect what we must and be eyes wide open about the threats and strategic competition. And in that respect, commerce is right at the center of that too. So deciding which technologies, whether it's artificial intelligence or semiconductors or software or hardware that the United States has, that China wants to advance their military capability. Figuring out what that is and working with our allies to deny China that capability. And that's what we have to do, you know, protect and also promote. And then finally, invest in America. I'm of the view that by far the most important thing we can do as America in our strategic competition with China is to invest in America.
Exactly.
So if you look at like what I do in my little corner of the world, I am managing the CHIPS Act, investing $50 billion in America. I manage broadband, $50 billion to make sure every American is connected to high-speed internet. I do the export controls, denying China this technology, and export promotion, like I just explained. Of all those things, when I think about, hey, Gina, what's most important for competition with China, it's the first bucket, out innovating, investing in America. And so that's what I do every day.
And that's a little corner.
And that's a little corner. That's my little corner. But
One hell of a corner.
it's a important corner. But I think that first plank doesn't get enough attention.
Yeah.
You know, when people say, how are we going to compete with China? Bet on us.
Agreed. And I think, Secretary, the idea when you think about what the President has been doing over the last couple of years, which is invest domestically, a strong
Completely.
domestic economy with a strong labor force, strong economic productivity over the coming 10 years, is effectively going to allow the U.S. to compete internationally.
Without question. I believe it.
Secretary Raimondo, thank you very much for your
Thank you.
time.
Thank you.
Great
Pleasure to be with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.